See, great.
Well, hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Big Texas Author Talk. As you file in, we've got our we have our featured author, Glenn Blake here, along with our moderator, Cliff Hudder. So we're just gonna hang out for about 2 minutes and just let folks keep coming in. We had about 80 people sign up to join us tonight. So we'll let folks trickle in. But while you are, why don't you put in the chat just where you're coming in from. It's always kind of fun to see where everybody is. I'm here in East Dallas. Let's see if I can't. Let's see here. Nova Scotia is in the house. I love it. Welcome. Got the West Coast. Oh, that's waiting room participants. Let's go to meeting group chat. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. Southern Wisconsin in the house, as I'm seeing it. Oh, my brother lived in suburban Kansas City. I love it. Okay, well, welcome. We're super glad you're here. We will get started here in a minute or so. And as Cliff and Glenn are talking tonight, if you have any questions, just put those in the chat and we'll get those in our Q&A session, which we generally do about 15 to 10 minutes left in the hour. So if you have any burning questions, put those there. We do keep everybody on mute for the meeting, and then we just monitor your questions there. But I guess 4 years into for everybody doing Zoom, we kind of know how it works so far. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off officially. So welcome to the Big Texas Author Talk with Glenn Blake and Cliff Hudder. We're excited to have both of these gentlemen here. Cliff has been a moderator before and also a featured author on the Big Texas Author Talk. So we're always happy to have Cliff back, and we're really happy to welcome Glenn to the series. And for folks who aren't aware, we've actually been doing this series once a month for the last 4 years. My name is Blake Kimsey. I am the executive director of Writing Workshops Dallas, which is also writingworkshops.com. And we came together with Gemini Inc. at the start of the pandemic to have this statewide reading series, author talk series, craft series. So it's just been going great for the last 4 years, and we're really happy to continue it. And we're very happy that you're making this part of your week, your Wednesday night, your month with us. I'm going to hand it over now to Mandy. And before I do, I just want to thank our sponsors, as we do each time. Humanities Texas has given us a generous grant to keep this series going, to pay an honorarium to our moderator, to our author, which is very generous of them. Lone Star Literary is also a great literary website here in Texas, which has great events featured from all around the state. We really like to thank them. And the University of Texas San Antonio Library System, which always kind of helps us spread the word. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for finding your way here tonight. And I'm going to hand it over to Mandy Lynn, who is the Public Classes Coordinator and Program Director at Gemini Inc.
Hi, thank you, Blake. Good evening, writers and community. My name is Mandy Lynn. I'm the Public Class Coordinator for Gemini Inc. in San Antonio, Texas. We are a nonprofit whose mission is to teach the craft of writing to writers of all skill level to help them bring their own stories to life. And we're really excited to be here for another month partnering with Writing Workshops Dallas and funded by Humanities Texas. And we are here with our featured author, Glenn Blake, and featured moderator, Cliff Hudder. So I'm going to share with you their bios, and then I will let Cliff take it away. So Glenn Blake, our featured author tonight, has taught in the English department at Rice University, the creative writing program at the University of Houston, and the writing seminars at Johns Hopkins. He is currently a professor of creative writing at the University of Texas at Tyler. He's the author of Drowned Moon, Return Fire, and The Old and the Lost. His novel, Degüello, is due in December. He has edited Gulf Coast, the Hopkins Review, and Boulevard. He is now serving as the director of the University of Texas Press at Tyler. In 2000, he was elected chair of Penn Houston. In 2020, he was inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters. And our featured moderator, Cliff Hudder, received an MFA in fiction writing from the University of Texas in 1995 and a PhD in American literature from Texas A&M in 2018. He's been an archaeological laborer, a film and video editor, a photographer, air compressor mechanic, electrical lineman, and educator. In addition to articles on regional and American literature, his short stories have appeared in several journals, including Alaska Quarterly Review and the Kenyan Review. His work has received the Bartholomew and Michener Awards, the Pittman Prize, Short Stories Award from the Texas Letter of Institutes. And he serves as the chair of psychology and sociology at Lone Star College, Montgomery and Conroe, Texas. In 2017, Cliff was inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters, and I will let you take it away, Cliff.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to be here. Good to see you, Glenn. I don't even want to say what year it was, but when in my youth, I decided I would go and take a creative writing course, which I did. I went down to Houston to a continuing ed course, and it was a lovely lady. I think she had actually published a book about talking goats, as I recall. And I got a lot out of it, but I thought, well, the University of Houston is right over here. Maybe I could, finagle my way in there. All is a way of saying that I really consider Glenn Blake to be my first and most influential teacher when it comes to the writing of fiction. And that was at Cinco Ranch. Glenn, if you remember that place, it was maybe it still is a UH satellite. I can still remember that. I think I remember the night when it occurred to me as a kind of revelation that stories are made out of sentences, and good stories are made out of very carefully crafted sentences. This had not occurred to me before that point, I think, before I got into your class. I took notes. I don't know if you noticed me doing that, but I still have those notes that I pass off as my own insight to this very day from your class. And Glenn was a terrific teacher, really a model as well. It just seemed impossible that any kind of writer could come from a place like Pasadena, Texas. And then I found out Glenn was from Liberty, Texas, right up the road, which made Pasadena seem like a metropolis. So he's been a teacher, an administrator, an editor. There's no telling how many student writers he's influenced, all while being an artist who has been creating these carefully crafted stories over the years, and for the most part set in a part of the world that, to be kind, I would say has been overlooked, okay, by a lot of people. So I'm very happy to see you recognized and your work recognized, like by the Texas Institute of Letters here recently. So it's great to see you, and I know your Texas connections go way back, and also that you've been away for a while. And Glorioskis, you've returned. You've come back here. So I thought, just as an icebreaker, before we hear some of your work, maybe you could tell us what you've been up to recently. What brings you back here to the Lone Star State?
Well, Cliff, you can hear me, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I can.
Well, yes, I remember that class out at Cinco Ranch. I think this was way back before Katie was there. There was a rice and grain elevator there. I think Cinco Ranch campus was out in the rice field, and about every other student was a nutria or an armadillo. It was quite a commute. I loved that. I remember you in my class. And Cliff, everyone watching this knows that Cliff is a magnificent writer too. Looking forward to this wonderful novel that's just about to come out of his. Yes, I grew up in Southeast Texas, in between Beaumont and Houston in the rice fields. And I felt like so many writers that I had to leave home to actually write about a place. So I went up east. I went to grad school at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. Faulkner and so many of the expats in the 20s went to Paris. And when they asked Faulkner, why did you leave? And he said, I had to leave to see my home. And they said, what do you mean? And he said, if you stay in Mississippi and write about Mississippi, he said, the problem is it's like being forced to stand too close for too long by the side of an elephant. And they said, what do you mean? And he said, after a while, you can't see the elephant. So it required him to move away to see it from a distance. And so for the last 15 years, I was in Baltimore, freezing my butt off in that snow. And there was an opportunity to come back home. My family on my mother's side was from Tyler. I grew up in Tyler, learned to ride a bicycle, learned to drive in Tyler in the Piney Woods. And I have been lucky to be invited back to be part of the faculty at the University of Texas at Tyler. Happy to be back home. Real Tex-Mex food, okay, that you don't get up on the East Coast. You get something that's called Tex-Mex, but it ain't Tex-Mex, trust me.
Okay, well, it's great to have you back. And I do kind of have at least a minor in Glenn Blake studies, which means I've got a lot of quotes here that I've collected over the years. Here is Joseph Haskey in Texas Review. Few writers are able to effectively master the ideal balance of linguistic economy and profundity like Blake does. Eric Miles Williamson, who you know pretty well, I think. He calls your stories tight, finely beveled, curt, and eerie. The weight of what is not said is crushing. We might get back to that. That's kind of interesting. And Michelle Newby in Lone Star Literary Life, it's one of my favorites. If Raymond Carver and Larry Brown had a love child, the result would be Glenn Blake. So I thought, yeah, if there's anyone in the audience not familiar with your work, this might be an opportunity to give them a sample.
Well, fantastic. I just wanted to thank the Big Texas Author Talk, that's a mouthful, for inviting this big Texan to talk. And I am honored. And this ain't my first rodeo as far as giving readings at universities or book signings. And the propriety is sometimes before giving a reading to dedicate this evening to a group, and I'd like to dedicate it to my students and colleagues at the University of Texas at Tyler, who've been very kind and embracing and inviting this country boy to come back home. When I was asked to do this, what, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, they said you probably can only have about maybe 10 minutes to read. And if you know my stories are about 30 or 40 pages long, takes about an hour. So I decided to read, if I may, Cliff.
Yes, please. Yes.
I decided to read a chapter or two from the novel that's due in December. This is the fourth draft, final draft, all handwritten. And I looked at the first chapter, and there are squadrons dropping F-bombs on the reader, and I thought not quite appropriate. So I'll go to the second chapter just to get you caught up quickly. It's not necessarily a hero, but certainly our anti-hero is an aged graduate student getting a PhD in American literature up east, finds out that his father has passed away, and he comes and returns to Southeast Texas. The title of the novel is Degüello. Some of you know your Texas history. Degüello comes from the Spanish word degollar, which means to cut in the throat, to behead without mercy. You probably might know, have heard that for 13 days during the siege in San Antonio, Santa Anna had his bugle corps play the Degüello for the men inside the mission and the chapel. As far as my scouts are concerned, I think that there are 198, maybe 189, maybe 190 of you in the mission. If you'll look past the north wall There is Cessna with 1,400 troops to the south, past Davy Crockett at the Abatis with the Tennesseans. There's another 1,400 troops to the east, 1,000 to the west, 1,000. That's close to 5,000 troops to your 200. The message that Santa Anna was sending to the men in the mission and the chapel is, we're here. And tomorrow morning at dawn, we're coming in there. And you can't stop us. And when we get there, Degüello, there will be no quarter. There will be no surrender. There will be absolutely no mercy. Degüello. Where's your car? I hear him before I see him. I'm walking down Battleground Road, my pants wet, my shoes in my hand, when he hits me with his spotlight and shouts, "Where's your car?" "In Baltimore," I shout back, shielding my eyes. "You walked in from Baltimore, did you?" I can see him now, standing up in the tower, at the top of the ladder, in the door of the wheelhouse. "I flew in," I say. "I flew into Hobby." I stop at the landing. The chain is up, painted on each side of the tower is the word lynch. That's quite a hike in itself. He says, "What is that? 25, 30 miles? 20, I say. I can see him leaning on the banister, both hands resting on the railing, the life preserver on his left side, the spotlight on his right. "Permission to come aboard." "Not just yet," he says. There is exactly one laughing gull on each of the posts of the landing, not just yet. "I could step over this chain," I say. "And I could blow your ass back," he says. And the gulls, scores of them, laugh hysterically. "I could blow your ass all over this boat." "Do you threaten every passenger who walks up?" "That's just it," he says. "I ain't ever had a passenger just walk up. You're my first. And look at you, barefooted. You say you just got into town, you ain't got no luggage. And what did you do in your britches?" "Son, we don't have any facilities on board." The gulls erupt in a chorus of guffaws. "Will you take me across?" "What time is it?" he says. "A 5:45. I say 5:43. 17 minutes, he says. "In 17 minutes, he says." He turns off the spotlight, steps into the wheelhouse, and closes the door. "What happened?" I say. "What?" he says. He removes our moorings and we embark. Each and every last gull takes flight to escort us. They take turns diving into the froth of our wake. "The battleground," I say. "What about it?" he says. "It's underwater." "Sunk," he says. He is a small man, wiry, burned down one side of his body. One half of his face looks like it has melted. His right arm withered, his right eye white. "It sunk," he says. "This whole part of the country is sunk." He looks at me with his good eye. Subsidence, they call it. Subsided some 10 feet this century. The refineries up the channel are to blame. They keep pumping out the groundwater. We keep sinking. He is wearing a captain's cap. "Are you the captain?" I say, the pilot. I look up to the dark windows of the wheelhouse. I mean, is there someone up there steering this thing? "You'll get there," he says. He is smiling. "If I was you, I'd start worrying about what's waiting for me on the other side." He points into the wake, and I see the dark dorsals in the white froth. Dolphins, sharks. "I'd put my shoes on," he says, "and I'd tie my laces tight. He takes off toward the bow, a slight limp in his gait, and I take off after him. Why, I say. He is standing at the bow looking out over the water. What? I don't think you know where you're going, he says. I don't think you know what's waiting for you. It is almost dawn, and I look to the light in the east and see what he sees. Not a sunrise, not a sun coming up, but a fire, a big fire burning on the far shore. What do you want? He says. To get to the other side. When the gods want to punish you, he says, they answer your prayers. Now you understand me. I'm taking you across. I'm taking you to the other side. He takes off his cap and waves it in the air, and the scores of gulls cry. But me and my gulls, he says, we ain't waiting. We ain't waiting for you. We're going back. Do you understand? I understand, I say. There's nothing out there, he says. There's no one out there anymore. No one, he says. No one in his right mind, he says. Degüello, he says. It's a song. It was a song. They played it at the Alamo. It used to be a real show place over there, the country club section of town. All the oil executives lived out there. Big houses, big homes. I know, I say. But not anymore, he says. Most of the houses are out in the water now, most of the homes out in the bay. What happened to the people, I say? What happened to the families? Most of the old families died off. He said most of them moved away. Have they all gone? They ain't all gone. He says, I think there's some holdouts, but I shit you not. Their asses are out in the water. Their asses are out in the bay. They park their cars on the levee road and take boats to their houses. The city shut the place down, he said, barricaded the entrances, cut off the utilities. So there might be someone living in those homes, but like I said, no one in his right mind. It is dawn when the ferry reaches the other side. Each and every last laughing gull lands just long enough for us to ease into the landing, for him to lower the chain, for me to step onto the shore before the ferry drifts back into the channel, and they all take flight again. Last chance, he says, the ferry drifting farther. He reaches out with his good arm. Thanks for the ride. He shakes his head, lifts the chain, and shouts across the water. You won't like what you find, he shouts. Do you know what's waiting for you? Do you know what's over there? And I say, not loud enough for him to hear me, I say, home.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Got to be one of the few references to the Lynchburg Ferry in American literature, I would think. I have seen a story of yours that includes snow, and we might come back and talk about that and some of your new work. But for the most part, there's a very deep influence, it seems, from this place. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that. And somebody in the chat's already picked up on what Eric Williamson said. The weight of what is not said is crushing. Do you think the sort of cultural atmosphere of Southeast Texas, where we both grew up. I grew up about 4 miles from the monument. Do you find that has influenced your work in a way you can speak to?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. I think that I love the people, of course, I love being in East Texas in the piney woods. I love the people in the Southeast Texas too. Very reticent, very laconic, uh, uh, very tight-lipped. They don't come and cry on one another's shoulders. It was quite a shock for me to live up east where maybe 50,000 people lived in one city block and just talked incessantly. Different world, different culture, different literature, different letters. And I always tell my students in a writing class that anyone can write on the line on a page. It takes a master and it takes practice to write in between the lines. The not said being more important than said in some cases. And so many times stories, so many times our histories, our tragedies, they're so submerged, so deep underneath the water that the writing of the story is like having an entire cemetery submerged and all of the corpses surfacing. And little by little, and that in its own way is a stylistic or thematic epiphany of all these buried or submerged histories of ours. And my people, I mean, sometimes when the stories are reviewed, incredibly simple prose, and I read someone like Henry James, and I think, who the hell are these people? Very good stories, I understand that. But my characters, my people don't even know those words. I'm not saying that they only use monosyllabic words, usually, sometimes. Poetry can be written that way. There's the poetry and the language and the speech and the diction of my people. But certainly my stories are sort of haunted with, I thought, haunted with a story within a story within a story. And some people, I think even Eric Miles Williamson said, my stories are easy to misread because it almost requires another reading and another reading.
You mentioned of Faulkner before. It was interesting. Do you find that those people we grew up around, a lot of times they tend to not escape, not be able to get away from that part of the country, let alone look back at it. Have the home folks reacted to your stories? Is one way I would put that. Are they do they feel like you broken the code of silence in any way when they read your work?
Well, that's pretty easy because most of them can't read, but that's fine. That's a
Hmm.
joke. I was once at a book signing in the Brazos bookstore, and one of our peeps from the writing program, I think Olive Hershey, who lived in River Oaks. And so everyone going to that book signing was buying like 10 books because they could afford to buy 10 books. And I looked at Don Barthelme, my mentor, my god of postmodernism, and I said, wow, that's just disgusting. He said, one of these days, your family will come in and do the same. And I said, well, but they won't read these books. They'll use them for like a doorstop or something like that too. No, I don't think so. I think that I'm not very, very careful. I love these people. It's not my job. My job is to glorify their songs, to sing their songs for them, to talk about their desires and how those desires have been thwarted and how socioeconomically they have been thwarted or unable to follow those dreams. And then not achieving that happiness, that form of dreams shows the glory of that at least attempt. And that's what we do sometimes, living in sort of quiet desperation and not sitting back and feeling sorry for ourselves, but pursuing those dreams with the knowledge that it's absolutely impossible, the attaining of those dreams. It's but the attempt.
Yeah. Well, I know that you are branching into other regions. Is that something we can look forward to in the future from your Maryland experiences? Or
I hope not. But I was telling Cliff that I've, now that the novel is close and I am shopping it, and worked with an agent that I worked with back in the 80s, and she said, this will be fine, but this next collection, I don't want it set in Texas. I don't want to have anything to do with Texas. Do you think you could do that? And then at some point, you're almost like Jim Morrison of the Doors. I'm a lizard king. I can do anything. I don't care where it is. and living. So this is my stories are in this one collection. All have to do with blizzards in the mountains of Maryland, Pennsylvania, and they're just as Cliff. I think Cliff's seen one of them. They're just as absolutely brutal as my Texas stories. Everybody dies, but all the right people die. So that's one of the great things about being an author. Sometimes you just have a mallet, and if someone misbehaves, they're gone, right? So I'm hoping not. The novel, and I've already sort of outlined another collection will be back in my neck of the woods, my swamps, bayous, and sloughs.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the great god of postmodernism because if somebody like newbie compares you to a Carver or Brown, I think that's right. But I've always seen other things at work in your work, and it could be because you were always exposing us to this sort of thing in class, or just as a friend. You were always introducing me to new ways to read and contemporary stuff, and people may or may not know that you worked with Donald Barthelme, of course, at the University of Houston. You did a master's degree there, and then but also with John Barth in Hopkins, right? That was at Hopkins.
Hopkins, yes.
So, what? How did those gentlemen, do you think, influence your writing career, or just your approach to literature?
Yeah, they really did. I mean, I was corresponding with William Gass, the great writer and literary critic, right before his death, and he said, "Oh my God, what the hell happened to you to work with Barth and Barthelme?" And I said, "Well, Professor Gass," I said, "sometimes late in the evening, early in the morning, when I'm writing my stories, I suffer from narrative irregularities." Not intestinal irregularities, but it's tough to work with those two gentlemen. And what I found interesting in the late 80s and the 90s, working with the two of them, what they passed on to me and what I passed on to my students is it's very difficult as a fiction writer to try to create a story or a novel in the late 20th and early 21st century. It's not that everything's being said. We're close to a whole lot of it being close to being said. It's considering other ways that narratives can be represented on the page. And a lot of, for those gentlemen, it's not just fragmentation. It's not something that represents collage. It's almost like that their stories or their way they tell stories are non-sequential, non-linear, completely not A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And that's not because they're showing off. What is Don's great quote is about literature in the late 20th century, art in the late 20th century, art is not difficult because it wishes to be difficult, but rather because it wishes to be art. Is there a way to still tell a story? John Barth in his workshops every semester would say to us, "I don't want to completely destroy your dreams about being a writer, but in the late 20th century, the early 21st century, the reader is going to know where you're going before you get there. They're going to anticipate the ending of your stories. They are so well read in certain stories and novels." And so, yes, I do think that. I mean, I think that someone asked me the other day, I mean, Don always used to say theme is a fancy word for how, style is a fancy word for, what and how. Style is how something's written. I do think that stylistically, my prose is more minimal. It's very pared down, very laconic, almost skeletal. But thematically, the way I think about what a story's about, I think has been influenced by Barthelme, Barth, Hoover, Gass, Vonnegut, that entire school, Robert Coover. So, and it's just important for a young writer to have read all these different styles. And it's also as a professor of creative writing, I'm always, and you know this, Cliff, that I'm always warning other writers, writing coaches, is We have to be careful that we don't tether, shackle, and manacle our student writers with their own stylistic and thematic limitations. In other words, if this is the only thing that we can do, we can't pass that limitation on to our students. We have to give them narratives or styles way beyond what they're expecting. And this could be depending on the writer. I mean, I have writers in my class this semester whose families are in Central and South America. And so I don't assign to them the minimalist. I don't assign Ray Carver, Frederick Barthelme, the Montana School, Richard Ford, McGuane, Harrison, Mary Robeson, Jim Robeson, Ann Beatty. I assign to them Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, Isabel Allende, Cortázar, because that is the narrative and that is the voice, the chasing of those dreams.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great gift to have a teacher that realizes that. And I tend to, I know you were pretty close to Donald Barthelme. His shadow was still on the ground by the time I got to U of H, but I understand he was very easy to get along with in workshops too. He was very, very kind-hearted, sort of easygoing. I'm being ironic, but what was your experience working with the Don Barthelme?
Don Barthelme, he was just, bless his heart, a complete monster in workshop.
Right.
As opposed to Barth. Barth's completely different. Barth would spend maybe 2 or 3 hours line editing your stories, your narratives with a red ink pen, and then spend like 5 or 10 pages handwritten comments on the back in black ink. Barthelme and Cliff, you're setting me up for a great story. He would set us up in a lecture hall at the University of Houston. This is back when you could smoke in the classroom, and Don would be in his cowboy boots drinking a bottle of wine. And he would have the MA students at the front of the hall. He'd have the MFA students in the middle, the PhDs in the back. And you would have to walk to the front of the classroom to the lectern, and he would turn all the lights off, and he would have a spotlight on you. And you would stand there, and you would read your narratives to this class. And then he would, speaking of Degüello and Degüello, he would gut your ass in front of your peers and then feed those intestines to you. I mean, the great story is one day, one of my buddies in the program, his name was Richard Kabinski. He was a semi-pro basketball player. He was always writing these basketball stories, a really long story, like 50 or 60 pages. There wasn't even a dribble until about the 20th page. And so he's reading this story, and Don's pretty much tipsy, had a couple of bottles of wine, and you can hear him boom, Rick, God damn it, please tell me, dear God, does it get any better? Rick goes, oh yes, Don, oh hell yes, Don. This is like a page and a half. And Don goes, I think not, have a seat. Blake, get your ass up there. And so I remember getting up there and shaking, and I read like a 20-page story in about like 40 seconds because this man was not going to stop me. And what he did, I mean, that was back in the day when I thought I was going to be the East Texas Faulkner. So I would read these god-awful swamp stories so that the reader could feel the mud squishing up to his toes. And one time I was reading this story, and Barthelme comes booming down, thought he was going to beat the hell out of me, elbows me off the lectern, picks up my story and starts reading it with the voice of a Southern Baptist minister. And everyone's just howling, and I'm standing over in the corner crying. And he looked at me and he goes, you are not William Faulkner. You do not ever do this again. And I said, no, sir. One more anecdote, do I mind? Can you?
Sure. Yeah.
Another good friend of mine, Tom Cobb. Some of you know Thomas Cobb. Thomas Cobb wrote the novel Crazy Heart, on which the movie Crazy Heart was based. Jeff Bridges won the best Oscar for Crazy Heart. The great story, and allow me to toot my tiny horn. When Tom Cobb wrote Crazy Heart, it was about an alcoholic country western singer, and he named that character after me. So Jeff Bridges in Crazy Heart, his name is Bad Blake.
Right. That's right.
Some of my friends to this day still call me Bad Blake. So Tom Cobb is presenting this novel to this workshop. It's Jeff Bridges. It's that character, the first chapter. And Don booms at him, Thomas Cobb, God damn, what are you going to do with this character in the second chapter? Please tell me, save me. And Tom is terrified and he goes, I don't know, Don. I may have him play at a bowling alley and take some women back to his hotel room. What do you think I should do with him, Don? And Don says, I think you should pour gasoline all over him and set him on fire. This novel is going nowhere. So that's what it's like to be in one of the workshops. But anyway, but that's something that I don't do.
Different methods, you know.
Sure.
Sure. Yeah, Olive Hershey tells similar stories, and they're often alcohol is related, which is surprising to me, I suppose. I just realized that Mr. Barth had passed away. I guess it was last month. Had you kept up with him, kind of, and
I had kept up with him. They put together a collection, a brilliant idea. I've even thought about that, working with the University of Tyler press at University of Texas Press at Tyler, of doing that for some of my teachers. But the Johns Hopkins University Press published a collection of essays of all of his students going back over the years, and they praised him. And wow, that's sort of like the who's of American letters. I think Mary Robeson went through there, Jim Robeson went through there. Louise, I don't know how many of us listening, Louise Erdrich went there, Love Medicine. Both the Bartholomew brothers, Don, both of his brothers went through there. It was really, it's an interesting, the writing seminars. And I had stayed in touch with him. And the beautiful anecdote that I mentioned was that he was a perfect gentleman, a perfect scholar. And years later, when I would get my pathetic stories published in these obscure journals, most of the time that don't even exist anymore because they were publishing someone like me, I would get a postcard. I don't care how obscure the journal, and it would say, very fine job indeed. So this gentleman was reading everything. He was reading all the journals. And whenever, of course, most of those journals, you know, as you know, Cliff, they don't even pay you. I remember the first story I got published, I think was Florida Review. And the editor contacted me and said, I'm sorry, Mr. Blake, we can't pay you, but we can give you 10 copies of this journal. And I went, 10 of that journal? That's okay. It's not that big of a deal. So, but he read everything and he would stay in touch with it. He was so proud of his students. He was a great, great teacher.
Yeah. And I believe he was 90 or more when he did pass away. I don't know that if Blake had wanted to reserve I'm reading some of the comments. But this had occurred to me too from back in your classroom, and I saw you maybe a couple of years ago at Brazos Books. You give such good readings. Have you been approached at all for audiobooks or audiobooks of your own work?
No, I would love to do that. I mean, I love giving readings. I mean, there are not many things I do well. I think I do that well. Some of that had to do with when we were so poor in Southeast Texas that I couldn't afford to go to college. I had to go to college, you know, where Lee College is over in Baytown. And the college offered me a drama scholarship. And so for the first year, I built sets for the theater, which certainly helped me blocking out short stories and novels, finding out where the character is going to be, what would that set look like. And then finally, throughout my college being in plays. Now, you couldn't find very many characters that required somebody this ugly, but memorizing lines, memorizing plays, listening to the scansion of the poetry, listening to the lines, where the pauses are. So yes, I would love to do that.
Mhm.
I think someone at one point, maybe in Baltimore before I left, offered to have me read my stories aloud. And I don't know how that would be done. So you guys, please, I don't get to see a lot of these chat comments. So those of you, like, if you find some of those, read them off to me. Or you don't have to.
Sure, we're getting some interest in whether or not you're going to read your own audiobook. If you've read any of your own audiobooks, because I'm getting the sense that maybe they like your voice when you read. Also, folks want to know if your classes are offered online or if you have to enroll in UT Tyler, how they could go about taking a class.
They're not offered online yet, and I'll be checking in on that. Maybe we could do something with UT Tyler, so that I could do something online. I've done that before. But yes, UT Tyler it's interesting. It's a beautiful campus. I don't know if you've ever seen it up here in the Piney Woods on lakes. What surprises me is there's more and more semester by semester, more interest in creative writing workshops here. And I've been given the honor to create a literary journal. I was one of the co-founders of Gulf Coast down at the University of Houston, worked with Paul Ruffin at the Texas Review, helped John Irwin create the Hopkins Review up in Baltimore, and then moved on to be senior editor at Boulevard. And so that's what I'm going to be doing here. So I'm excited about that. And I love working with all types of writers.
Those are some incredible literary journals. Those are some of the best in the country.
Well, I see 41 chats. I haven't seen any of the chats, so you'll just have to pick one. Just read the nice ones.
I want to throw in that I was able to see that film that was made of the bottom.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty good. That's a great story, first of all. I think that's
So I do think that there's interest in making a feature length of Old River, which is the first story in, here we go, The Old and the Lost.
Mhm.
That takes place of a woman living on a river in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane. And there's also an interest in making a short film of the title story of the second collection, Returned Fire, which I think that's interesting too. Yeah, the bottom is an interesting story set also down on the Gulf Coast. And some professors from SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, approached me about some of these stories and said, may we make movies of these? And I went, cool, let's do it. And I thought that the way they filmed it was fantastic. You guys are going to have to help me out. Clooney is now on Broadway, doing something on Broadway. And I think that when he made the film of what he's doing on Broadway was in black and white so that colors would bleed through it. When they did that with the bottom, it's basically set in a old abandoned service station. That's an old mobile station, and it's all in black and white. And when the Pegasus on the roof turned itself on, they would show that in color. And I thought, whoa, that's cool. And that ends up haunting the narrator in that story. Yeah, Cliff, thank you for saying that. They sent me a copy of that, and I thought it's one of the most visually beautiful short films I'd ever seen. But I mean, it was my prose and my dialogue, and they basically butchered my dialogue. I just thought it sucked. It's terrible, very flat-footed. And so I would invite faculty members from Johns Hopkins out to the farm, and we would watch that, but I intentionally muted it. And they would say, well, what, can you get the volume up? And I said, I don't know. There's some problem with this. So I'm just going to have to, I'll tell you what they're saying because I wrote it, right? Yeah, and a couple of other stories have been performed at the Dallas Museum of Art. One, Shooting Stars and How Far Are We from the Water. They have a wonderful series there. Some of you from all around Texas, some of you are up around Dallas and Fort Worth. It's Texas Bound. I love that series. And they would pick Texas writers, and then they would pick actors from around the country. like Marcia Gay Harden and Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee
Mhm.
Jones read one of my stories. And you're in the audience, and that's bizarre because you have someone like Tommy Lee Jones reading one of your stories, and he's punching lines for jokes that aren't funny. And so everyone's laughing, and you're in it's almost like that Woody Allen film. And then finally they get to my really good funny lines, and no one's laughing. So I'm standing up and laughing in the audience. And there's some large lady in front of me saying, just who the hell do you think you are? And I'd say, well, I'll tell you what. It's like Woody Allen in the movie. I wrote this story. That's the funny line. But yeah, okay.
Right.
Hey, we do have a few craft questions coming up in the chat. Peter Wallace wants to know, just maybe in general, Peter, I think is asking, do you have anything to say about the state of literary fiction or just the genre of literary fiction? I know that literary journals and your work probably fall in some of that category, but do you have anything in general to say about that? Peter, did you want to clarify maybe in the chat, but just about the genre of literary fiction?
You'll have to read it to me. I can't see it.
Well, while we're trying to clarify that one, Charles asks a question. Well, Peter just clarified with literary fiction, is it real or is it just writing with fewer restraints? I guess the difference between genre, what's classified as genre fiction, and then maybe the idea of what makes something literary fiction.
Okay. The whole term of literary fiction gives me, as Huckleberry Finn would say, the shivering fantods. It makes me break out in pimples all over my body. And I do think that sometimes, if you're not careful, when you do go to graduate school, you're pulling major muscle groups trying to impress your writing coach. Now, if you're working with a Bartholomew or a Barth or a Rosalind Brown or Ray Carver, all the great teachers, Robert Coover, oh God, you can't help but try to write something like they're writing. And if you don't know exactly what they're doing, you just make a fool of yourself. And I will say this, some of the most pared down, magnificent, minimal fiction, minimalism, whether it's Junichiro Tanizaki or Yusunari Kawabata from Japan, those are minimalistic stories. I would call that literary fiction. Not because it has to have bells and whistles, not because it has to have photographs or fragmented, metafictive, fragmented narratives, like more in common with like collage and art. But I do think that, sometimes when I have student writers who try to write magical realism or to write surreal fiction when they don't know how to write realistic fiction yet. It's always easier. It's always recommended that you learn how to paint as a painter, or learn how to paint an apple before you attempt to paint a god. Okay, even if you look at early Picasso, that wasn't Picasso. Some of his early work is extremely almost representational art. You need to learn how to do that before you do something else. So I do think that that's one of the things as an editor of these journals. I do think if something's beautifully crafted, whether it's realistic, whether it's minimalism, I think that is just as much literary fiction as wow, Finnegan's Wake, almost unreadable, if not unreadable. Pension, Vonnegut, all right, where you're probably only good for maybe a page of that, all right, or you're going to have, again, narrative irregularities. That's a good question, though.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. We have another one here from Charles, who says, the chapter you read reminds me of The Passenger, Stella Maris, Cormac McCarthy's last novels. Are you a fan of McCarthy?
Oh, yes, I worship at the altar of Cormac McCarthy. I don't think that there's anybody writing today or what we just lost him, even close to him. Just amazing, absolutely amazing. I gave myself the assignment to read maybe 4 or 5, maybe 5, 10 novels while I was finishing sort of my life's work, this novel. And those were Blood Meridian, a masterpiece. It's somewhere in between biblical, Melville, Faulkner, absolutely brutal. I hear that someone is signed to do the screenplay of Blood Meridian. I don't think that's possible. Okay. I was reading Blood Meridian. I was reading The Great Gatsby. I was reading Huckleberry Finn. I was reading J.M. Coetzee's Waiting for the Barbarians. I was reading the Swiss writer Max Frisch, Man in the Holocene. I was reading every one of these books every day, not 20 pages a day, not 10 pages a day, not five, reading 1 page a day and studying that style. But yes, I think McCarthy's magnificent. And yes, thank you for I wasn't thinking about the pastor in that chapter. I was thinking of something Stygian, something like the River Styx. I was thinking of the old burned, scarred ferryman as being Karen crossing the Styx, taking him to the other side. And I'm not going to spill the beans, but when this character gets to the other side, it's his own version of hell. So thanks for that. Was that Charles?
Yes, that was Charles. That was Charles.
Is that Charles? Is that Charles from U of H?
From Charles Alcorn.
Yes, I think I know Charles Alcorn. He looks, after 20 years, a hell of a lot better looking than I look after 20 years. If that's the Charles I know.
Glenn, it is the Charlie, yeah. I'm down here in the valley in Edinburgh, but yeah, it's good to see you, brother.
Well, it's good I'm glad I don't have to look at you, Charles, because it'll probably hurt my feelings. I'm on the 6th floor here. I just throw myself out the window and kill myself.
I'm glad to hear you're in Tyler, Glenn, and thanks for that reading. It was wonderful.
Okay, well, good, man. I tell you, we had many wonderful conversations. You were at University of Houston?
Yeah, I graduated in 2006 with Eric Miles Williamson. He's down here in McAllen. I'm in Edinburgh, and Joe Haskey, and yeah, we're all keeping together.
Okay, well, good deal. Good deal. Tell Eric I said, hey.
I sure will.
All right.
All right. Well, hey, Glenn, we have one more question for you before we wrap things up, but it's from Lauren Crumby. She says, when you're writing characters, how do you know which ones to remove from the final copy?
That is a great question. It's a great question. And if I may, Cliff knows this. In a creative writing workshop, I emphasize to young student writers something right out of Aristotle, right out of the Poetics. And Aristotle suggested that woman is her desire, man is his desire. Okay, that's what propels these characters. That's what limits these characters. Too many times beginning writers just sit in a chair and stare out the window. And when they write a story, their characters are sitting in a chair and staring out the window. What do these characters want that they can't have? Bartlemy always used to insist at the front of that classroom, what's at stake, what's at risk, what's in danger of being lost. Now, this has a lot to do with what characters are in there and not out of there. What's at stake, at risk, and danger of being lost. I had the honor of working with Raymond Carver on 2 occasions. Once when he was drinking heavily and once when he stopped drinking. And we would have workshops and close the workshop down in the great bar on Rice campus, Valhalla, which is in the basement of the chemistry building. It was a graduate student bar. They didn't have to close it down. The beer was cheap. You could go in there as a grad student with $5. I think the beer was something like 25 cents and just die. You just bring another liver in there with you in the igloo. And Carver would every evening at about 2 or 3 pour himself off his bar stool and say, and toast us and say, somebody has to want something they can't have or have something they can't keep. That's great advice for every story. Somebody has to want something they can't have, Aristotle's desire, or have something they can't keep, stake, risk, danger of being lost. Okay, when I people my stories with characters, I tether their hearts together almost with like a treble hook, so that if one character moves away from the other characters, it tugs on their heartstrings. All right. And I come up with the character's desire before I even come up with their gender, even before I come up with their names, what they want and how the other characters impede that desire. All right. In my stories, wow, that's a very, very good question. My characters, I load them up on trebuchets or catapults, and their asses are out of my second draft if I don't need them. They're just getting in my way. And I don't have to kill them. They just uninvited to the next party. Good question. Well, listen, everyone, thank you very, very much for inviting me. I hope this was a little bit helpful. I wish I could have read something longer, maybe next time. I am up in the piney woods, and just as we would say in as Texans, just come on with your bad self. Come and visit me.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Cliff. Thank you all for being here. We will put a recording of this up on YouTube for folks who want to revisit it. And there was some great writing advice throughout. Thank you so much, Glenn. Cliff, thanks for your great questions. And I hope y'all have a great rest of your Wednesday evening. Thanks, y'all.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. See you soon.
Question for Cliff. Do I get a chance to see any of the chats? I didn't get a chance to see any of them.
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I can
those-
send you the chats, or if you we don't have to close the meeting out now. You can look at my kids are going to bed, but you can look at the chat if you have access to it.
Okay. Well, I'll do that. I'll do that. I just didn't want the people to be rude and say that I didn't answer them because I didn't see them.
You know, I think we got all of the questions that people had for you about craft and writing. And
Okay.
so, yeah.
Okay. Well, this went well. I had a good time. So thank you guys for having me.
Yeah. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
We did too. We did too. Thank you so much.
See you soon, Glenn.
Okay, I hope so. Good night, everyone.
Good night.